Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for our second virtual community conversation. Today's topic, what does back to school mean now? I'm Molly Davis, Assistant General Manager at WFDD. The pandemic has created a lot of challenges when it comes to education and the return to school, and we're going to try to cover quite a bit of those in this conversation. We want to say thanks to all of our panelists for taking the time to join us today. There are more virtual community conversations from WFDD to come, so keep your eyes and ears open for information. If you're not subscribed to our email newsletter, that's a great way to keep up with everything we have going on. You can visit our website, that's WFDD.org, to subscribe and set up your preferences. And you can always follow us on social media. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, if you're viewing this conversation on YouTube, you can participate in the conversation using the live chat feature. If you're watching on our Facebook page, you can add your comments and questions to the post. Now, I'm going to turn this over to WFDD reporter Keri Brown. Education is among her beats, and she has been following the return to school closely. Keri?
Thank you, Molly. Welcome, everyone. We know that North Carolina will remain in phase 2 as we begin the first day of school on August 17th. Last month, Governor Roy Cooper announced reopening plans for North Carolina public schools, and they have pretty much two options. One is Plan B. It's a hybrid approach. It uses a mix of in-person classes with limited capacity and remote learning. Then you also have Plan C, which is remote learning only, and many districts are actually going in the school year with this model because of an increase of COVID-19 cases in their communities and challenges to implement social distancing and other requirements. Some of the districts that we have here today are starting with that Plan C, but we're going to hear more about the challenges and give you a better understanding of what to expect as we go into this year like no other. I want to start off, first of all, by introducing our expert panelists. To my left, I have Shay Woodbury. Shay is the chair of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Board of Education. Hello, Shay.
Hey, Keri, how are you?
Good, thank you. Rhonda Mays is a social worker in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system. And then
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. To my right, we also have Dr. Scott Elliott. He is the superintendent of Watauga County Schools.
Afternoon.
Below him, we have Todd Warren. Todd is the president of the Guilford County Association of Educators.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. In the center, we have Dr. Sharon Contreras. She is the superintendent of Guilford County Schools.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I want to get into the most pressing issues right here, right now. We had schools that closed in the spring, but we are going into the school year. So Dr. Contreras, I'd like to start with you. What are the most pressing concerns as we begin the school year?
Yeah, it's been a ride so far. It feels like we've been working on the school year for several years. That's how it feels. But we've had many challenges. In North Carolina, there are no health metrics or indicators that are suggested to districts as guidance for when to reopen or when to close schools. So there's guidance out there, but every school board has to determine on their own, which I think is really unfair to educators who are teachers, school board members, superintendents, not public health officials, to try to figure out when we should open or close. We're also facing significant funding shortfalls. I want to remind everyone that during the 2008 Great Recession, public schools received about $110 billion. Right now, we've received about $13 billion, and there wasn't even half the crisis that we have right now. We didn't have the sort of requirements for social distancing, the technology needs that we have. We need funding for additional staffing or building space to meet the social distancing requirements. And we're also just facing, during the remote learning period, significant delays in even procuring technology for students. Last week, we were finally able to piece together all of our state and federal CARES Act funding, county funding, and year-end funding to order 78,000 devices. We can't get them for 120 days. And we don't have school nutrition waivers yet, which means that children could go hungry after August 31st. Additionally, we have about 600 school nutrition workers that could be without a job if some action isn't taken quickly. So, this list, and I'm sure my colleague will tell you more what they're facing in their district, but this goes on and on and on. It is a crisis. And I think that we've gotten through this pretty well for 4 to 5 months. So people think that it's okay, but it's not okay. Nothing is okay about what is happening in public schools right now.
Thank you, Dr. Contreras. Shay, can you talk a little about Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools?
Yes, thank you, Keri. I fully, support what Dr. Contreras is saying as it relates to what's going on across North Carolina in our school districts. And I think we have been able to meet some of these challenges because of our willingness to work together as school districts. And I was telling you before we aired that there is an urban school district task force that's being led through the leadership in Guilford County and Wake County. But that, sense of support is so necessary for us to try to figure out how to maneuver through a lot of the challenges that Dr. Contreras mentioned. I will say that in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, our biggest challenge too, as relates to the tools that we need to go into Plan C for the first 9 weeks, is around technology. And what I will say about our county commissioners is that previously there was money set aside to upgrade technology. So we're in, a pretty good place to make sure that all of the students and staff that need the technology, we already, had it in place and need to purchase, very little to meet our needs. But, I definitely feel the stress and empathize with the other districts across North Carolina that may not have had, the technology, set aside that Winston-Salem Forsyth County had. So, we're all in this together. And so, I just look forward to working with the other districts to get through this time.
Dr. Elliott, Watauga County Schools, your rural school district, as well as you have Boone, like a bubbling hub, center there. So, our booming center there. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing right now, your approach going in the school year. It sounds like you're also doing remote learning to start off the school year with.
Yeah, thank you, Keri and WFDD for this great opportunity and great forum. So Boone and Watauga County are a little bit different in a way than Guilford County, Forsyth County, and the counties in between us, but we face a lot of the same challenges. We are, as you mentioned in the introduction here, we are kind of taking a blended approach between the Plan B and the Plan C. Most of our students are on a 9-week remote start to the school year, but we are prioritizing what we're calling our high needs students, our children in our pre-K program, many of our children who are served through our severe profoundly disabled children's programs, and others, and including some who lack internet access. Dr. Contreras mentioned that earlier, in our school building. So we are going to be having staff and some number of our children being served in the school sites to start with, but we made the decision 2 weeks ago to start the school year remotely. We are fortunate in Watauga County because throughout the summer, numbers have been fairly steady. We haven't seen significant spikes. We don't have some of the fatalities and hospitalization numbers that you see in some of the larger areas. But what is unique to Watauga County is the very special relationship between the community and Appalachian State University. That, in a small town of our size, that welcoming back 20,000 students ages 18 to 24 is certainly giving us pause for concern. Our rates are going up in our community, doubling about every 2 to 2.5 weeks. And our numbers are fairly equally divided between that college age demographic, 18 to 24, which does include many of our first year teachers, but also concerning as we're seeing an increase in cases among young children school-age children and among adults ages 24 to 49. We're pretty much seeing widespread community spread of the virus. So the Board of Education made the decision to have a slow and steady start to the school year. What are the specific challenges? I think that that the other guests also characterized these. Superintendents across the state of North Carolina have been advocating all summer long for additional regulatory flexibility and additional funding in lots of areas, but three in particular. That issue of rural broadband. There are many places all throughout our state and in every county in North Carolina where there are children who have no access to both broadband and even cell phone service. That is an inequity that we just should no longer tolerate. The second is an economic inequity around childcare. It's always been an issue, but now we see it as parents need to go back to work, and the ability for us as a community to care for our children when it's not safe for them to be back in school. And then third, back to that federal waiver that was mentioned earlier, in our small community, we served and delivered 250,000 meals to the children in our community. We have an enrollment of about 4,500, so 250,000 meals since March. Food insecurity and instability is a huge issue in our community. And I'm hoping that a silver lining looking back on all this will be that we take the steps that we need to close those gaps and address those inequities.
So before I do a follow-up question, I did want you to explain a little bit more about, so it sounds like we're in a somewhat of a crisis mode in regards to nutrition, school nutrition right now. Is it that we're just waiting for the federal government to take action or make sure the audience understands what's happening there, what needs to happen?
Right. So real briefly, our child nutrition programs, the programs where children receive meals at school, is what we call an enterprise program, that it operates as a self-sufficient separate business within the schools. Many school systems like ours and others supplement them with, electricity and maybe even funding and staffing, but they have to operate solvent, on their own. We do get reimbursements from the federal school child nutrition program, the school lunch program, for all of our free and reduced lunch children. But during this crisis, the federal government and the USDA issued waivers to states. And so we were able to provide free meals to any child in our community by delivering them, having them picked up at the curbside outside of schools, rally points throughout the community. And we were reimbursed for all of those meals at the state level. The state even gave additional money and some flexibility for our school buses to go out and deliver those meals. Unfortunately, North Carolina received word just yesterday that it is very unlikely that the USDA will offer an additional waiver for those meals to be provided to all students free at that higher reimbursement rate, which means that we can continue to operate that way until the end of this month. But starting in September, we are back to the regular way of funding and operating our child nutrition program, which means we're afraid that many children in our community will go without meals because of that.
Dr. Contreras, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that or what you all are doing if remote learning is going to continue for the first 9 weeks to help, fill that gap with nutrition with kids. Are they coming into building places? Are there different places in the community?
Yeah, we're going to have to depend a great deal on the community to assist with this. Public education has done such a good job with all of these things outside of our wheelhouse, outside of teaching and learning. We've taken care of the nutritional needs of students. We've even started taking care of the medical needs of students with mental health clinics and basic health clinics in schools. We've done so much. And now we've reached a point where we're struggling to provide the basic sound education. And if the US government will not approve this waiver, the community is going to have to step in to make sure children do not go hungry. But they cannot point the finger at the school boards and superintendents who are begging and pleading, please feed the children. Please keep the food nutrition workers working, because in most communities, they are the working poor. They are parents of our children or very elderly people who can't make ends meet. So this isn't just a crisis for our children. It's a crisis for some of the elderly and very poor people in the communities across the state, both urban communities and rural communities, as Dr. Elliott said. So we implore the public to please reach out to your congressional delegation and make your voice heard.
And I'll jump in based on what you said to mental health to Rhonda here. But before I do that, I want to throw in a question. It's come across a couple times from different listeners, Nicole Farley, Shayna, Gina. I want to make sure that we're clear on public schools. Do you feel like your hands are tied in regards to the metrics? I think people want to know, what do you need to see to actually reopen buildings in regards to case counts and that sort of thing?
I don't see that my hands are tied. I don't think it's my place or my expertise to make the judgment about when it is safe for students to return. And I think it is unfair to place that burden on school boards and superintendents to determine what test positivity rate and prevalence rate should be used to determine when it is safe, when we have full departments at state and federal level who are filled with people who do this for a living, who trained for this, who can tell us either keep students home, keep staff home, or return to school. Instead, you're having every school board in the nation having to make this determination on their own. It's not right.
And Rhonda, if you could talk a little bit about, thank you, Dr. Contreras, about a little bit of the mental health needs. I mean, there were a lot of internships, maybe even jobs for kids this summer. There were challenges in the spring. Can you talk a little bit about that situation, what you're seeing on the ground there in Forsyth County?
Well, speaking as an individual, I'm not speaking for the district, but speaking as an individual social worker, the things that we've had to make certain that we do is to help to close those gaps that were already stated of food gaps for families. We've taken food out to families in need in order to try to assist them during this time. And as far as the mental health, there's still a great need for supports for our families and even our staff, because this pandemic has not discriminated against any of us. Our staff members, as well as our children and their families, have been impacted. People have lost their jobs. We have families who are dealing with actually contracting COVID-19, and they're trying to figure out, how do I keep my family safe and also get well myself? How do I continue to try to provide money in our home? So how do you prevent utilities being shut off, and how do you prevent evictions? And it was a good thing that there was a stoppage of evictions and utility disconnections for a period of time. But now, what happens after this? Some people are not able to go back to work because where they were working, there's not work at this time. So how do I support my family? And that is a trying situation. And then when you talk about mental health treatment, people can't get mental health treatment when they don't have insurance. And if they're not working, they don't have medical insurance in order to pay for that. That's why it is, vital that we have some type of universal health care in place. So therefore, no matter a person's economic or situation, that they can receive the help that they need. And it's a really trying time for us all. No one is going untouched during this time.
Rhonda, let me ask you, and if anyone else would like to raise their hand on this one, but are there programs out there, if someone out there listening right now and they're starting to experience some of these situations, or they have been? I know we have students who we don't really know, they only maybe logged on once in the spring, and if that's even playing into all of this, but are there programs out there that people can connect with, to help them with some of these issues, so the kids can focus on being a student?
Some of I know in our district, we have the Bulldog Clinic, and we have different resources here in our district in which families can tap into. And we have a crisis line on our website that families can call, and then they will be referred accordingly. And and I know number of the districts have some type of support system in place at this time in order to be able to refer families. But if families have Medicaid, there's the Cardinal telephone number that they can call and get connected with mental health services. And then a lot of them are doing tele mental health, so they can get an appointment. And sometimes they may have to go in for their initial appointment, but then after that, they will be able to see a therapist or a doctor through the use of the internet. But again, that's a problem too. If they don't have internet access, they can't even receive that service. So everything, the more we think that we're addressing issues, the more we realize there are more issues there than what we realized that were there before. More and more of the divides are being revealed during this pandemic.
And we're going to touch a little bit about some equity concerns. Todd, I want to go to you. Todd Warren, president of the Guilford County Association of Educators. Teachers, I know I've been getting a lot of questions about, what if they get sick, or when we get to the curriculum aspect, I'd like to hear a little bit about their thoughts on that. But can you add to this part of it, what we're talking about in regards to some of the concerns for teachers, as well as what we're discussing in regards to, what their students are going through, some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for hosting this really vital discussion. I think, the anxiety level right now for not just teachers, but all staff being asked to return to the potential to do in-person learning during a pandemic is understandably really high. But I think it's really important that we understand that teachers want nothing more to be back in the classroom right now. But as a society, we have to come together and find a way to make sure we're doing it safely. And I think it's actually really important that we start to name some names in that discussion, or, for just school nutrition alone, for that USDA waiver. I'm looking on my computer right now with a letter signed from 36 US senators. Senator Richard Burr and Senator Tom Tillis didn't sign on for that waiver. And so we're pulling together teachers and community members to go pay Tom Tillis a visit this weekend on August 8th in a car caravan, because it's really important that he hears this message. Children will go hungry and people will lose jobs if we don't get this waiver. Additionally, we have a state government that did not pass a budget last year that would have helped not solve all these issues, but it certainly alleviate some of the issues, just to provide basic health care for our bus drivers and child nutrition workers. And so I think it's important that we start to name the names of Phil Berger and Tim Moore that have not been in session all summer. They could have very easily called the House and North Carolina Senate back in session to pass a school budget and to allocate some more of the CARES funding. There's over $600 million in CARES funding that's still up in the held by the North Carolina State General Assembly. And there is $3 billion in a quote unquote rainy day fund, a surplus tax fund. So if we want teachers to go back in the building and we want them to feel comfortable doing so, then we need to update the ventilation systems. We need to provide the PPE. We need to do all of these things. Educators, from custodians to bus drivers to school nutrition workers and teachers, we're willing to do our part, but we need society to meet us halfway and tell us that there is going to be the resources there to do it safely.
I think we might have just lost Keri. So if I may, I'll just add to Todd's comments. I don't know a single teacher who does not want to be in the classroom with their students as soon as possible. They just want to do it safely. And I don't know a single parent who wants to send their child to school to get sick, or who wants their children to get sick. We're all trying to figure this out and work together. And even though we are fortunate that we have seen lower levels of the virus in younger and school-age children, and the science around the viral shed and and severity of the illness among children is continuing to evolve. But we know that we can't send children to school without teachers there to teach them. And in our community, the percentage where we are really seeing increased cases, and I know this personally, the employees that we're working with right now are the demographic of our teachers. And I just want to make that same plea to the community that Todd is making, which is that the virus is not exclusively a school issue. The school is just a part of the ecosystem of our whole community. And if we want to get our children back into school, then we need to do all the things that we can be doing as a community to get the virus under control.
I agree completely. And I think one of the major issues we're facing that is part of this full ecosystem is the issue of the broadband connectivity. It is unacceptable in a civilized society that so many of our students and citizens don't have access. And I read one report that said for Black and Brown Americans, nearly half don't have access to broadband connectivity. Near 13 of my schools in the neighborhoods around the central city areas, the core cities, about 2/3 of my students don't have access. That means they don't have access to education. They will not learn. This is simply not acceptable anymore. But I think that what we have to do is help our communities understand that this is not a school district issue. So many of them are calling superintendents, sending emails to boards of education, but not holding elected officials responsible for this, as Mr. Warren said. And the government has a responsibility to make sure that the internet is no longer a luxury, but that it is a public service, a public good to all residents. You can't even shop anymore. And I mean, grocery shopping within the pandemic, it's very difficult to do that without the internet, to check your health records, to schedule an appointment, so to search for a job. So not only are students suffering, but their families are suffering. And we need the community to rally around education in the same way they rallied around the healthcare professionals and said, we demand that you give them personal protective equipment. And they did that, and the government took action. But we don't see that same rally around education. And we ask that the community really sit down and look at why this is happening, because it really did, the pandemic sort of brought it all to a head, but this has been going on for a long time. It's just exposed it like a X-ray almost. So we really need help from the community in calling elected officials and saying, do something about this so that teachers can get back to doing what they love.
I did want to bring up a little bit about IEPs and students with disabilities, as well as, English as a second language students. I think there are some concerns there about some of these students, but particularly the IEPs. I guess I'll start there. I've had questions about, how will we ensure that those are fulfilled, and, how do you offer services that usually in person are necessary? How does that look going into this year if we're starting remotely? Shay, if you could talk about Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and can you tell us a little bit about what they're doing with IEPs or with students with disabilities?
Yes, so we are definitely, by federal law, having to still adhere to our services to our exceptional children. And we're that much more intentional about making sure that our EC staff, particularly from the district level, trying to work with the school sites to make sure that our students are being served. I think we did, tens of thousands of different types of paperwork by way of, technical digital means, which, stretched us beyond, what we ever thought we could do from a digital perspective. But It's another challenge. And I have gotten emails from parents saying, how will I get, that face-to-face attention that my child needs just because of the physical therapy piece and just so many other distinct needs that we serve from a face-to-face basis. But now that we're in, this virtual environment, how do we continue to meet those needs? And I'll be honest with you, it's about, some of us taking risks to get to those children. And that's the part where, this is, not political. And I don't want to go away from your question, but I do want to say that as a school board member right now, more than ever, we're trying to depend upon the expertise of our superintendents and staff and people who can help us to make decisions based on what's good for our students and staff, and having a personal opinion about what should happen. I'm right now I'm really glad that we have a strong superintendent in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, and there are strong superintendents all across our state trying to give us the advice and the recommendation, which now is more powerful than ever. Please recommend what we should do to move our children and staff forward safely. And we, this is just not the time to politicize, but Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools, to get back to your question, definitely having to circumvent challenges to serve, especially our EC population. And I'll talk about this more maybe later. We do have CARES teams, which the superintendent used some of our CARES dollars to implement what we call boots on the ground teams to actually go into homes as we go through these first 9 weeks of remote and virtual learning.
Dr. Elliott, is there anything you want to add on that end?
Well, I would say that this is a concern that we're all facing. We know that remote learning is not ideal. We want to see our students with us in person, and that all children, to some extent, in my opinion, suffer when they're not in school. But we know that there are some children that suffer a great deal more than others because their services cannot be met remotely. And I mentioned that in Watauga County, our plan is we're going to try within the local current health conditions and with lots of safety procedures in place to bring in some of our children whose services can only be provided in person. We've worked throughout the summer to provide or to identify safe locations from all around the community where teachers and therapists could meet individually with students and families. But there are many other IEP modifications that can be met remotely or virtually, or through the kinds of assignments that are provided. But all school districts in North Carolina are still providing a lot of compensatory services or extended school year to children with disabilities from last school year. So it's a great concern that we have, and just as others have said, it's a balance. It's a balance of meeting those educational, emotional, social, and physical needs with doing our part as part of a community to get this virus under control.
And I did want to touch base on, Dr. Contreras was talking also about some of the equity issues, but parental support. I had one listener, Lindsay Altman, and her big thing was, are there programs out there to help working families? I think they're struggling as we begin this school year, especially if it's remotely and say they have to go to work, or they're trying to help their kids out, whether if they are working from home, but not everybody can do that. So how are districts, is there a plan in place, or are there resources out there to kind of help some of these families right now who are kind of, trying to figure this out themselves too?
In our community, we're seeing a lot of parents who are working together to create cooperative environments for children to be supervised and their needs to be supported. We've seen some entrepreneurs step up in local museums and different centers that have space available, but we're also seeing a great deal of flexibility among local employers who are helping their employees to be flexible with their hours where possible, and other employees who are opening up space for their employees' children to come in and be supervised in a safe place. We are the third largest employer in our own community. It's a concern that I have for our teachers. We are providing free childcare for school-age children of our employees so that those teachers can teach to be available to everyone else's children. But it's one of the top 3 things that we are facing in our community, along with broadband and food insecurity. And again, I think it's a way that I don't think that anyone views schools as babysitters, but it just goes to show how interconnected we all are and how much we rely upon our schools to be safe and healthy places for children to be, so that parents can go to work and so that the rest of our economy can function.
And Malisha, you had your hand up, and then Todd after that.
Yeah, so just to add to what Dr. Elliott is saying, here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, I was just on a call with our equity director in regards to the learning centers that Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools is working with the different centers around our community to provide satellite sites for our students, to try to, break some of the burden that we see, not just in our community, but across, the country, as it relates to trying to find a safe space for children to learn in light of parents having to go back to work. Because we know as we move into, I think, the equity, issue, we understand that the divide is very obvious, especially in some of our communities where parents do not have that privilege to work from home. They have to go to work, or they won't have a place to live or be able to go and get food for the family. So we're working specifically with several community organizations, and I will say, with great gratitude, thanks to Forsyth Promise, who is coordinating our initiative here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, to be very intentional of how we connect to the different organizations to help set up these learning centers.
And Todd, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I want to say, I have a deep sense of gratitude for the nonprofits and the school systems and the way the churches, the way that everybody has stepped in to make sure kids get fed, that we, increase internet connectivity. But I also want us to be honest about the depth of the crisis that we're in, and these kind of Band-Aid approaches will not solve what we're facing. These will not get us back to school on a regular basis. We will have constant disruptions from outbreaks of the disease until we have a coordinated federal response. And up until now, the president and the federal government have completely abdicated any centralized federal response. And so when we ask about what programs are needed, is we need Senator Tillis and others to pass the HEROES Act. That is $3 trillion worth of funding. There is no way that individual school districts and counties can come up with that kind of money. Time and time again in the last 10 or 15 years, we've bailed out the banking industry, we've bailed out the home industry, we've home construction, we've bailed out the airlines. Our public schools are in need of a bailout, and we just literally need to pay people to stay home for a little while, get a handle on the disease, distribute the PPE, so that we can go back to work as normal instead of having to worry about what level of disease will we go back to work with. This is it's a problem that's solvable, but our elected officials on up to the U.S. Senate have not taken action, and there's bills sitting on their desk right now. The HEROES Act is sitting on Tom Tillis's desk right now, waiting for him to sign it. So I just don't want us to make it more complicated than it is. We need action from our elected officials.
To be fair, states have received a lot of CARES Act money. North Carolina, over $3.5 billion. Public schools have gotten a pretty nice chunk, although it hasn't gone directly to schools. Some has. I think Guilford County, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Contreras, is somewhere around 30 million if you count what the state sent in CARES. But I'll have you elaborate on that. Some people are like, well, we've got this money. Why aren't schools being able to reopen? I think they're still trying to wrap their head around that. So maybe Dr. Contreras, you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, because I think that's a fair question. And many people are asking, well, what did you do with the money? Well, we did receive $20 million. And in fact, the county provided us another $10 million. but the cost of the technology alone is $40 million.
Yeah.
That doesn't include one dime of personal protective equipment or address the dilapidated buildings and ventilation systems, which had they been maintained all along. And remember, in this state, only boards of county commissioners have the statutory responsibility for school facilities. Had they been maintained, we'd be in a better position for teachers to return. We costed this out, and it cost $100 million to return students safely to school. We have 30 million, and that will simply help with the technology. And again, as Mr. Warren said, as Dr. Elliott has said, we appreciate the philanthropy, but philanthropy is not an adequate, nor is it an appropriate response to these sort of deep inequities in this country that are exacerbated when you look at it by race. So this has to be addressed as a systemic in a systemic approach. It can't be, please, our Guilford Education Alliance galvanized the business community and provided thousands of laptops, but we still have tens of thousands of families without laptops. And we can't depend on the generosity of others to give when we can fix these sort of structural issues. And not only can we fix them, ethically and morally, we should fix them.
Shay, you also had your hand up.
Oh, yes. Let me see here. Yes, I did. I didn't know if I had muted myself. I just wanted to thank Mr. Warren for the courageous conversation around, the obligation of our government, to help us. And like I was telling you, Keri, and I think I got a little passionate about a previous interview that, from a state perspective, our resolve is the national government. I can't ask another country to come and help us in North Carolina. I can only go to the United States government. And I have personally written letters to Tillis and Burr and Representative Alma Adams. My school board passed a unanimous resolution, whereas we need help from the federal government. We need the state to come and do what it is supposed to do. Otherwise, you null and void the contract between the people and the government. And that is a scary place to be. And I don't mean to sound an unnecessary alarm, but public school education is a part of our democratic infrastructure. And once we start to dismantle it based on politics and so-called lack of funding from the perspective of, well, we got money for this, but not that, we care more about defense versus education, then we really need to look at, do we appreciate being a first world power, structure that not only we, I think benefit from, but the whole world see us as a beacon of how to be as a first world country, but not without a great public school education infrastructure is what I'll say. So I just really appreciate even what Dr. Contreras is saying and shedding light on. We appreciate the money that has been given to us, but for instance, here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, to go into Plan C, even with the $16 million that we have, we're still $20 million short. And so, something has to give. And by law, we have to have a balanced budget. So I don't know what the implications of that is when, it is something. It's scary as it relates to, all that a school district has to bear as it relates to providing a place for our students to be educated. Also, we are a major employer. So, once we're affected, it really starts to affect the health and whole of our community. So, that's what I will say to that.
So funding, not just on a federal level, but obviously funding in North Carolina for public schools has been an issue for quite some time. Is that something else that you feel would help this problem at this point? I know the state's still trying to figure some things out as well.
Oh, absolutely. When I was just looking at national data, and I think we are fourth up from the last as it relates to per student spending. And so New York is up at the top, and we're, North Carolina, pound for pound is a progressive state as it relates to population growth, urban scale, if you will, and a state that's moving definitely into the 21st century with health and technology, et cetera. But we're spending on public school as if we're still like 100 years ago or something. That to me is definitely very concerning, that how little we spend in North Carolina per pupil for education.
And Dr. Contreras and Rhonda, you also had your hand up, but I'll start with you, Dr. Contreras.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Chairwoman Woodbury said. We are very eager to finance, defense, and even business. I don't want to leave that out. And just think at the tax cuts in this state over a decade have cost the public sector and public schools billions of dollars. If we were even at the average in per pupil spending at the state, if the state was at the average, Guilford County would receive about $175 million more every single year. Just calculate that. And we wouldn't have had to have purchased 78,000 devices. I think about how the superintendent of Baltimore City Schools was just presented with a bill from telecoms company for $650,000 to supplement the internet or broadband connectivity for students while they continue to be billionaires. But the school districts presented with nearly $1 million bill. This is unacceptable when this is, as Chairwoman Woodbury said, a foundational democratic institution in this society.
And Rhonda?
Yes, I just wanted to continue to echo what was being said. We cannot forget who's responsible for providing the funding for our school districts across North Carolina. That's our state legislators. We need to make certain that they do their job. And then also when you go to the federal level, they need to do their job as well. We cannot have schools functioning without the necessary funding. And this pandemic has added even more of a need for the funding that we already have not received. I know often you hear from the politicians that we're giving the school districts money. Yes, but at what level? If you're still funding us, as Chairwoman Woodbury said, back in the dark ages, then that's not going to help us for the needs that we have now as school districts. And even with the pandemic, there are even more needs, because when you talk about the PPE, how much time will it be? How much money are we going to receive to continue to be able to operate? Because PPE is not cheap. So do we, once we open, then we turn around and close weeks later because now we've run out of money for PPE. We've run out of money for disinfecting the schools. We've run out of money for making certain we have the correct ventilation systems working in our schools, and then even the equity divide, when you talk about making certain that all children have access to a quality education. But then when you say that, well, we have to decide who's going to be able to come to school. That should not be something that we have to do. We should be able to have all children who need to be in school be able to attend school when that time comes. I'm not saying right now, because I don't want us to start getting messages. I'm not saying we need to go back to school today, but I'm saying when that time comes, superintendents and school boards need to be able to have children come to school and not have to look at funding and say, well, we only have this amount of funding, so we can only have this many kids use the bus system in our school district. No. If we're going to be in operation, all children who are in our care who want to attend school should be able to attend school based on us having the available transportation, not based on their family's ability to provide their own transportation. So we have to look at that, as well as the broadband and then the mental health of our students and families as we begin to open up schools. And when I'm using families, I'm also talking about our school families, because this is a very stressful time. We are still dealing with so many unknowns, and everyone wants to be back working in their schools, but they want to do it when it is safe and not worry about if they're going to contract COVID and take it home, if they're just a carrier and they have no symptoms. And there's just too many unknowns right now.
Thank you, Rhonda. And just a reminder out there for our viewers, you can add your questions or comments to the live chat on YouTube during this discussion. I want to switch gears to curriculum. I really want to talk about that. I think there are a lot of questions. Will the quality be there? Will it be the same remotely as what we saw in the spring? And so Dr. Contreras, I wouldn't mind if you could start with that question. And then Dr. Elliott, I'll probably go to you after that. What are we looking at as we're going in for this first 9 weeks in Guilford County remotely?
So I want to begin by saying, I know this was frustrating. As a parent, it was frustrating for me as well. But what we did in one weekend was turn 385 years of public schooling upside down. And I think that public educators should be applauded for the tremendous efforts they did with limited resources to provide some semblance of education during the spring. We have been working for months, as districts across the nation have been doing, to make sure there is more consistency, that there's more synchronous instruction, meaning more live instruction, but also recording that live instruction, because the parents, we know, will be working, and many of the children will be in childcare facilities without educators or individuals who feel qualified to assist them with schoolwork. So those parents will have to assist children in the evening or over the weekend. So we're providing both synchronous and asynchronous lessons. And for the first 3 weeks, to give teachers even more time to plan, we have recorded lessons from our most highly effective teachers in the district, so that our teachers could plan for when live instruction is ready right after Labor Day. So a lot of work and effort is going into this. Will it be perfect? Absolutely not. But I want the public to know it's going to continue to evolve and improve.
Yeah, I also want to echo that thought. On March the 14th, our educators pivoted on a dime, and I'm so proud of them for essentially transforming our system of public education in a week. And I also want to say that it was a bumpy road. My wife and I have 2 school-age children. One of them absolutely thrived in remote instruction throughout the spring and the early summer. I had another one that really, really struggled. And our teachers realized that we have to differentiate, and we have to reach personally out to those families and to those students and to try to meet their needs. What's going to be different for us in our community going into this school year is that we will have more structure, more routine, and more clarity about what each teacher will be doing, about what each student will be doing, what their schedule will be like. And we've scheduled school in a way that even though it will be remote for many students, it will reflect and be similar to what they would experience if they were in school. I just want to remind everyone that even though we've had all summer to plan for what the school year would be like, it's been less than a month since Governor Cooper announced the plans for the reopening of school, with the mandate that we provide an all remote option for children and families who need it. So yet we're inventing a whole new level of education, and in our schools, and I'm sure in Winston-Salem, Forsyth, and Guilford County schools as well, We've opened those doors to our remote schooling. We're now rescheduling our face-to-face schools. Teachers will be coming out of those schools, teaching in the remote school, teaching children from multiple grade levels from across the county. I just ask for a lot of grace and flexibility from our parents and our teachers as we work through all of this together. But we also know that some of the options are going to be limited, particularly at the high school level, with some of the great hands-on technical, career technical, vocational kinds of things that we do. Some of those things just aren't going to be possible. Instead, though, we're trying to offer those children and families as many high quality experiences as possible. We know that we live and work in an era of school choice. And I'm actually pleased to see that in our community, a lot of folks who haven't been in our schools are now coming back to us because they see and they hear about the quality of work that our teachers did back in the spring, and they want their children to be able to experience that. And for those that have struggled, I would just say we'll continue to work together, and our teachers are fantastic, and we hope to have those kids back in school with us as soon as possible.
What will testing look like? I'm curious. I think there have been a lot of questions about some of the state tests, or, you know, if there's a federal, so can someone tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes.
How would that happen in a remote setting?
Yes, I think there was statewide news yesterday that absent additional federal waivers, that the state of North Carolina must continue with its testing and accountability program. I just want to acknowledge on the behalf of teachers that our statewide testing program is largely mandated to us from our federal waivers and from some state level legislation. Some of that is self-inflicted at the state level, but that those standardized tests are not our priority right now. It is the social, emotional needs and health and of our children and getting them back into school. Of course, we're going to teach a curriculum, and we're going to provide our children with high level of rigorous, relevant teaching and learning experiences. My hope and my plea to our state and federal elected officials is they realize, just like they did last year, that accountability models and testing, those kind of things take a back seat right now. But right now, we'll begin the school year operating under a normal testing and accountability model. And my hope is that gets addressed very soon.
And Todd, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to piggyback on that and saying any focus on standardized testing right now is really unconscionable, given we already know that there's large degrees of race and class inequities that come to the table with testing. We like to pretend that they're objective, but right now, our children and our communities are living through a lived trauma. I've heard Dr. Contreras refer to this is the potential of us facing a lost generation, and to think that we're going to take some kind of standardized measurement or tool and continue to label with our children with that is really unconscionable this time. Right now, I would just like to posit that our society is actually being tested to pull together, drive down the levels of disease, provide the resources to make sure that our children are housed, fed, and safe. Education can follow after that, but those things have to happen first.
Dr. Contreras?
I will add to all of this that I do think assessing students to see where they are is very important. But I think the accountability on schools is, in the words of Mr. Warren, unconscionable. But I think what it can be used for is to measure what our society did for children. So I do think we should be measuring the amount of learning loss, because it is indeed a indicator of how well this society provided for its educators and its children. And we as Americans have the right to know how much learning loss there was as a result of us not controlling the pandemic, allowing it to spread, and then not doing anything or everything in our power to make sure that we could return safely to school as quickly as possible.
And Dr. Contreras, while I have you, real quick, I also want to ask you about virtual academies. I think there's a lot of confusion, but that is an option. If I have a question from a listener who would like to know, if I enroll in a virtual academy, but then my school reopens halfway through the school year, can I opt out of that? I mean, the virtual academies are pretty much an online option. Is it year long?
Yeah, so parents can transfer in and out at semester and at the end of the school year, not because we're trying to be inflexible, but because we have limited allocations. So
Mhm.
anytime a student moves in and out, it requires, because of the class size regulations, changes in how you move teachers. So we cannot just disrupt all of the schools with lots of movement. So we're trying to limit the movement to just semester and year end. There are some districts that are only allowing it at the end of the school year. We're trying to be a little more flexible with that. Great question.
And the big difference between the virtual academy and remote learning, can someone just briefly explain that for us? I don't know if it looks different in certain school districts.
For districts that are starting remotely for most of their students, as Dr. Contreras just said, the major difference is the commitment of time. So right now in our school system on a 9-week remote start, we're hoping that students that are not in the virtual academy will be back in school with us in October. That remains to be seen. But the children who are signed up for the virtual academy or the all remote option are committing to at least a semester or to a year. There's a tremendous amount of work going on in these districts right now to schedule students with all of these different configurations with those limited resources that we have. You can only imagine what that would be like to try to do that day after day, week after week in the middle of the semester. We've just asked folks that if you sign up for those virtual academies to stick with it, and then we'll revisit it at the end of the first semester. Otherwise, the differences are largely around the kinds of courses that are available, and again, largely at the high school level based on what can be delivered virtually or remotely.
And Shay, I know Winston-Salem, Forsyth County is also doing the virtual academies, correct?
We are, but I would just like to say from the school board perspective, we were given guidance by the State Board of Education around a definition of remote learning, which is about how do you learn away from the building, which is not exclusive to technology. We have to figure out, without even technology, how do we get children the necessary learning resources. However, and so there is no choice in that as it relates to whether a child have technology or not. The school district must provide that sound and basic education. If a family chooses to opt into virtual academy, that is a choice that says, we know that we have to have access to the internet and we know we must have a device to learn, right? And so that's why the virtual academies are, definitely choice-based, and we are making sure that families understand once you make this choice, there is a commitment to the technology and there is a commitment to that time frame. So, in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, that's the way that we've tried to help families understand the difference between remote learning. So regardless if you have technology or not, we may have to bring out a packet of information, whatever we have to do to connect you to learning, regardless of technology. Ideally, we have the technology, but in virtual, it is, a real commitment behind that technological requirement and staying in the virtual academy environment, at least for a semester.
So if I enroll my child in a virtual academy, will it take away from their homeschool funding wise, or will it hurt their homeschool at all?
No.
No, okay.
Yeah.
And then I did want to ask you real quick too, with this virtual remote learning, how do you assess, build that teacher-student relationship? How do you assess a student's, challenge, weaknesses and strengths in a remote setting? How about Dr. Elliott, would you like to comment on that?
I would, but I believe Dr. Contreras was about to answer.
Go ahead, Dr. Contreras.
Yeah, we are actually going to building some advisories and check-in periods for students. And we provided for parents what a student day, student week should look like. We're going to continue to provide that. We shared it at the board meeting, but we're going to provide it to individual parents. But they should expect that they have at least one contact with the teacher, with someone, a counselor, at least one of their teachers, where they hear a voice and where we know they're doing okay, just a social emotional wellness initiative in the district. We want students more than anything else to come out of this hole. We want them to be well. So we will be checking on them.
As I mentioned earlier, Keri, the structure and routines are so important. And so we're going to try to the extent possible with remote learning to replicate a school day for 2 days a week. Students will be interacting synchronously with their teachers and their fellow classmates, even though it will be electronically. And then for 3 days, they will be working remotely on assignments so that the teacher can then work with the other half of the class. So we're trying to keep our cohort sizes small so that the teacher can really be attentive to those individual student needs. Then on the Wednesdays, which will be the day in between those two cohorts, there'll be time for whole class groups to come together, individual times for teachers to work with students or to conference with parents. With our kindergartners, and we know that getting those children and families and that relationship started off on a positive note is so important. We are actually going to have very, very small group orientations for those children to come in and see their classroom in person and meet their teachers in person and do that in a safe way before we start the virtual learning.
And Shay, you also wanted to elaborate on that?
I wanted to add to the commentary by way of a part of, I think the question is about the children that for whatever reason we're not connecting to. How do we connect to the kids we can't get to? We know that once we went into remote learning since March, a lot of us lost children. The news readily reported in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, over 5,000 students had not logged on, even though according to our records, they had devices. So I said, there's even another level of the digital divide with once you get the technology at home, how do we as a family connect to whatever the school is asking us to do? So we've been able to use the GIS mapping system to figure out where do we have concentrations of students not logging in and not participating. And therefore, when we institute or implement our care teams from a county perspective, we'll know already which areas of the community to kind of go in and start trying to help parents to make sure that they're logging in and how to engage appropriately with the teachers. Every school also has its own individual care team. So we're trying to put in different layers of support to catch that 5,000, if you will, cohort of students that we lost between, March and June, just because of, the issue around equity and, underserved children being that much more vulnerable in this learning environment.
And we're getting close to a little over our time here, but I did want to ask you really quick. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this about fall sports and activities like marching band or theater. I mean, there's so much that goes into that, what we talked about, social, emotional, all of that. Do we have any update, or is there any idea of what that might look like that first semester? Dr. Ali?
Yes, we received a memo this morning from Hugh Tucker, the commissioner of the High School Athletic Association, with what we anticipated after the governor's announcement of the extension of phase 2, which is that we will continue to delay the decisions around fall high school sports. And in our community, that'll be a local decision, but our middle school sports will follow suit with whatever decisions are made with high school sports. It's just speculation on my part, but it seems like it's becoming increasingly less likely that high contact sports like football will be played in the fall. It may be that low or no contact sports like perhaps golf, cross country, maybe even volleyball, things like that might be able to play on a limited basis. We hope to hear an update a week from Monday, around August the 17th, I believe is what Commissioner Tucker said. In terms of other types of events, we know that these types of activities and events are so much of what makes for a healthy school experience and education for our children. It isn't just sitting in the classroom or the experience in the core subject areas, but all of these areas are what make a public education so powerful for children. But we have to continue to do it in safe ways. We're going to have to minimize our extracurricular activities and our mass gatherings outside of school, especially when we're less likely to be able to do it in a safe way and controlling social distancing and face masks, things like that. I have to believe, and I know that there'll be a time soon when we can get back to those kinds of activities. We just need to wait until we can do it in a very safe way.
You all have been so excellent. We appreciate you taking your time today. Before we go, real quick, if we could go around for just some final thoughts. Rhonda, anything else you'd like to say as we end this conversation?
I would just like to say, thank you for including me in this discussion. But for those who are listening, just to make certain that they're doing a lot of self-care, with them for their children as well as for their loved ones, check in on each other, make certain that people are doing all right. And if you see that they're not, to please connect them with community resources or even the crisis line through the school or in the community so they can get the needed help so they can get their mental health needs addressed during this time. It is very important that we are as healthy as we can be and that we understand and realize, as what was stated several times, none of us have been through this process before. We're all learning. We can put the best plans together, but when we actually go to implement it, we will find out that there's some holes in that plan and that we may have to make some adjustments. So let's be kind to each other during this process.
Rhonda.
Thank you.
Dr. Elliott.
Thank you. That was very well said. I would just like to remind everyone that empathy goes a long way. And we might all have very strong opinions, and certainly this pandemic affects different people in different ways, economically, financially, psychologically, emotionally. And for every need that someone has, for every strong opinion that someone has, someone else, even probably close by to them, is affected in a very different way. So let's be careful about how we talk to each other. Let's be empathetic and kind to one another, support one another, and we can get through this together.
Todd?
Yeah, I just want to applaud everybody here that's been working so diligently in public education. I think public education and healthcare have really been the backbone of the response to this crisis. It's just undeniable. And I appreciate their willingness to have some tough conversations. We have people here that are decision makers, and then the people that are literally the people that have to tell a parent it's safe for your child to go to school. And that's a responsibility we take very seriously. And so when it's not been resourced properly and it's not safe, then we have to have the bravery to do so. And I applaud everybody on this call for being willing to speak those hard truths when it's necessary.
Dr. Contreras?
Again, thank you for having us on this panel. I just want to reiterate what everyone else said. Irrespective of where you are politically, let's be kind to one another. Know that public educators go into this field because they love children and they want to continue and sustain this democratic society. So we want children back in school. We want our educators back in school, and we ask that you extend us some basic courtesy and grace as we try to work through all the issues so that we can get the staff and students back to school safely.
Thank you. And Shay?
Thank you, Keri. So I would just like to say that if not for, but because of this pandemic, we would not be at this moment to think about, the issues we have always had, and now that much more apparent in public school education. And I think that smart people know how to take negatives and make positives, right? And, I think that this is an opportunity for our society to transform public school education, which is what we've all been wanting to do. And you have, courageous hearts, like Dr. Contreras and Dr. Elliott around the state saying things, and people like, well, we're not ready yet. We're not there yet. We are now. And I think it's time for those leaders to finally, have their day in the sun regarding now we get to do something with education that will impact all children. And we are
very excited to get in good trouble in order to transform public school education.
Thank you again to all of our panelists and for everyone out there for this virtual conversation on what back to school means now. At WFDD, we're going to be following the education issues as they continue. What we're going to look at even 9 weeks from now, you can count on us, your public radio station from the Piedmont, Triad, High Country, and virtually everywhere in between. We can't do it without you out there, and we thank you.